Welcome to our Good Friday service. My name is Pastor Jacob, and with me today is Tom Ryan as our reader. Thank you, Tom, for being here today. We are excited as it is Holy Week. It has been quite the week, and I hope that this is a time of blessing for you. I forgot I'm on camera too. So a couple of things. If you're joining us for Easter, we would invite you to download the Easter Bulletin, which is at firstumcwaverly.org. That's on the main page. Or if you're watching that live stream, underneath the live stream, there are two banners. One, which is the bulletin that you can download. And the second is a place for you to say, hey, I was here, to let us know you were here. And if we can contact you and share any other upcoming ministries with you so that you have the most up-to-date information. Then there's that opportunity also. We worked this morning and tried to find the perfect FM station, and I'd love to tell you that I know that right now. But the two tests we've run, we're at two different frequencies. So currently we're at 87.9. But here's the thing. If you show up, when you show up on Easter, we're going to have to do that classic thing you used to do with you hit the scan button to try and find it. Or we're going to be around that 87, 88 range. We will have signs when you get here. Just know that if you didn't get it right the first time, seek and ye shall find, as Jesus said. Then also, so the way this service is going to work, and I'd invite you to not just watch it on screen, but to turn off the lights in the room. Excuse me. The Easter lilies have arrived and brings a tickle to the throat. I'd invite you to turn off the other lights in the room as much as you're comfortable doing to create that sense. In the sanctuary right now, the only lights we have on are the ones that Nancy's using at the piano and the candles and the few we have on the stage so that we can read. And this service, as it is written, is a service of light and darkness. And so as we approach the story of Jesus' crucifixion, we'll blow out a candle with each passage, and that light will get less. And that impact will rest with you more if you happen to have to be in a darkened room. We also invite you to sing along with us as we sing these passages from two of our favorite songs around this time. Were You There? And When I Surveyed the Wondrous Cross. So, before we get started in that, there was this really holy moment as we realized we had 5 minutes left before we started, and with no prompting, Tom and I it was right. It was the right space. We just turned towards the communion table and the cross. And I'll be honest, that was the fastest 4 minutes of prayer I've ever had. It just kind of, all of a sudden I realized when Nancy started playing that it was over. And so I hope this is as renewing as those few moments were for us. That this can be a space for you to stop, to pause, and to be aware of this holy time that we're in. So our first reading, as we begin, we will read a passage, put out a candle, and then sing the next verse in those songs. I invite you to be in an attitude of worship. Judas brought a detachment of soldiers together with police from the chief priests and the Pharisees, and they came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Then Jesus, knowing all that was to happen to him, came forward and asked them, "For whom are you looking?" They answered, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus replied, "I am he." Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. When Jesus said to them, "I am he," they stepped back and fell to the ground. Again he asked them, "For whom are you looking?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. So if you are looking for me, let these men go." This was to fulfill the word that he had spoken, "I did not lose a single one of those whom you gave me." Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it, struck the high priest's slave, and cut off his right ear. The slave's name was Malchus. Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword back into its sheath. Am I not to drink the cup that the Father has given me?"
Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they crucified my Lord?
So the soldiers, their officer, and the Jewish police arrested Jesus and bound him. First, they took him to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it was better to have one person die for the people. They led him away, bound as a criminal.
He would suffer and die that we might be made whole. I hate to interrupt this. Are we hearing Tom through this? Okay. I'm not hearing him on the monitor down here, that's why. Okay. Simon Peter and another disciple followed Jesus. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter was standing outside at the gate. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out, spoke to the woman who guarded the gate, and brought Peter in. The woman said to Peter, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Now the slaves and the police had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing round it and warming themselves. Peter was also standing with them and warming himself.
Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they nailed him to the tree?
Then the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Jesus answered, "I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple, where all the Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me?" And those who heard what I said to them, they know what I said. When he said this, one of the police standing nearby struck Jesus on the face, saying, "Is that how you answer the high priest?" Jesus answered, "If I have spoken wrongly, testify to the wrong. But if I have spoken rightly, why do you strike me?" Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest.
the side. Were you there when they pierced him in the side? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they pierced him in the side?
Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. They asked him, "You are not also one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." One of the slaves of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, said, "Didn't I see you in the garden?" Again Peter denied it, and at that moment the cock crowed. His closest followers turned against him.
As we have at times turned against him. Forgive us, Lord. Then they took Jesus from Caiaphas to Pilate's headquarters. It was early in the morning. They themselves did not enter the headquarters so as to avoid ritual defilement and to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered, "If this man were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." The Jews replied, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." This was to fulfill what Jesus had said when he indicated the kind of death he was to die.
The sun refused to shine. Were you there when the sun refused to shine? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble. Tremble, tremble. Were you there when the sun refused to shine?
Then Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." Pilate said, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." Pilate asked him, "What is truth. They handed him over to Pilate that they might have him crucified. Christ admitted his kingship and spoke only truth.
After he had said this, he went out to the Jews again and told them, I find no case against him, but you have a custom that I release someone for you at the Passover. Do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews? They shouted in reply, not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a bandit.
Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they laid him in the tomb?
Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. And the soldiers wove a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they dressed him in a purple robe. They kept coming up to him saying, Hail, King of the Jews, and striking him on the face. Pilate went out again and said to them, Look, I am bringing him out to let you know that I find no case against him. So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate said to them, Here is the man. When the chief priests and police saw him, they shouted, Crucify him! Crucify him! Pilate said to them, Take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no case against him. The Jews answered, We have a law, and according to that law he ought to die because he has claimed to be the Son of God. Now when Pilate heard this, he was more afraid than ever. He entered his headquarters again and asked Jesus, Where are you from? But Jesus gave him no answer. Pilate therefore said to him, Do you refuse to speak to me? Do you not know that I have the power to release you and power to crucify you? Jesus answered him, You would have no power over me unless it had been given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin. And being beaten and tortured, he who was God gave himself up to die for us. His life, his death, was to bring us back to him.
From then on, Pilate tried to release him, but the Jews cried out, If you release this man, you are no friend of the emperor. Everyone who claims to be a king sets himself against the emperor. When Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus outside and sat on the judge's bench at a place called the Stone Pavement, or in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now, it was the day of preparation for the Passover, and it was about noon. He said to the Jews, "Here is your king." They cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" Pilate asked them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but the emperor." Then they handed him over to be crucified.
When I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but lost, and pour contempt on all my pride.
So they took Jesus, and carrying the cross by himself, he went out to what is called the place of the skull, which in Hebrew is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on either side, with Jesus between them. Pilate had also an inscription written and put upon the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read this inscription because the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, in Latin, and in Greek. And the chief priests of the Jews said to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but say, 'This man said, I am the King of the Jews.'" And Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." They lifted him up for the last time to suffer upon a cross.
For us he died
to make us whole.
Again. When the soldiers had crucified Jesus, they took his clothes and divided them into 4 parts, one for each soldier. They also took his tunic. Now the tunic was seamless, woven in one piece from the top. So they said to one another, "Let us not tear it, but cast lots for it to see who will get it." This was to fulfill what the scripture says, "They divided my clothes among themselves, and for my clothing cast lots."
Forbid it, Lord, that I should boast, save in the death of Christ my God. All the vain things that charm me most, I sacrifice them to his blood.
And that is what the soldiers did. Meanwhile, standing near the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing beside her, He said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." And then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her into his own home. He looked upon his mother's face one last time.
He lived and died for us. After this, when Jesus knew that all was now finished, he said, in order to fulfill the scripture, "I am thirsty." A jar full of sour wine was standing there. So they put a sponge full of the wine on a branch of hyssop and held it to his mouth. When Jesus had received the wine, he said, "It is finished." Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit.
See from his head, his hands, his feet, sorrow and love flow mingled down. Did e'er such love and sorrow meet, o'er thorns compose so rich a crown?
Since it was the day of preparation, the Jews did not want the bodies left on the cross during the Sabbath, especially because that Sabbath was a day of great solemnity. So they asked Pilate to have the legs of the crucified men broken and the bodies removed. Then the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the other who had been crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once blood and water came out. He who saw this has testified so that you may also believe. His testimony is true, and he knows that he tells the truth. These things occurred so that the scripture might be fulfilled. None of his bones shall be broken. And another passage of scripture says, "They will look on the one whom they have pierced."
Were the whole realm of nature mine, that were an offering far too small. Love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all.
After these things, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, though a secret one because of his fear of the Jews, asked Pilate to let him take away the body of Jesus. Pilate gave him permission, so he came and removed his body. Nicodemus, who had at first come to Jesus by night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, weighing about 100 pounds. They took the body of Jesus and wrapped it with the spices in linen cloths, according to the burial custom of the Jews. Now there was a garden in the place where he was crucified, and in the garden there was a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. And so, because it was the Jewish day of preparation, and the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there.